welcome to our brilliant writer book deep dive analysis. Still have to figure out what I'm calling this thing. For Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So, if you are familiar with Brandon Sanderson, you may have heard that 2023 is the year of Sanderson. So, basically, Sanderson did this Kickstarter back in March last year. I think it was March, where he released four secret novels, or he announced that he was releasing four secret novels, rather, and those novels are going to be dripped out over the course of this year. And the first one came out on January 1st, or the ebook, audiobook, for those who joined the Kickstarter. And I did. So, read this book two times already just to see how it goes and give some reflections. The point of these videos, I guess, whatever we end up calling it, is not just to talk about the book. By the way, this is going to be a spoilery review. Lots of spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, just skip the latter half of this video. I'm going to give some basic impressions, and then we're going to talk about what was good, what was maybe could have been improved, and then what writers can learn from this particular book, because that's what we're all about here, how to be a brilliant writer. So we're not just reading books for the sake of reading books, which is fine, but we're also looking at what we can learn from them. So without further ado, let's take by the way, take a look at this beautiful cover. It's really well done. But I've basically condensed the ideas into three bullets. So 3 bullets on the story summary, and then 3 bullets on what went well, and then 3 bullets on a few other things. You'll see. All right, so let's start with what is the story of Tress of the Emerald Sea. Sanderson mentioned in his videos and blog that Tress is based loosely, or let's say not based, but inspired by The Princess Bride. So he said he was reading it with his wife, and she kind of commented, well, why does Buttercup just kind of sit there passively and not do something when Wesley disappears? And so Sanderson was thinking about this, and he's like, yeah, what if I wrote a story where the hero, the heroine, actually goes after the kidnapped hero? I don't know if you would call him a hero, but her love interest. Let's call him that. So the story is Tress, as you can tell by the title, is our main character, and she falls for the Duke's son, and his name is Charlie. And then Charlie is forced by his unpleasant father to go off on this journey where the father's trying to marry him off to a princess. But Charlie doesn't want to, because he doesn't care about anybody but Tress, really. And so he ends up getting kidnapped by a sorceress. And his father, instead of trying to get him back, is like, oh, well, I'll just find a new heir. And so it falls to Tress to go after Charlie and try to rescue him. She falls in with a group of pirates, and then she learns how to navigate the spore oceans. So Sanderson's really great at creating new worlds. He has this entire universe called the Cosmere, for those who are not familiar with him. And the Cosmere is like his own imaginary universe where it's populated with lots of different worlds and people, aliens, whatever. And all of these worlds have interesting features. So the feature of this particular world is that it has 12 giant moons, and its oceans are not made of water, they're made of spores that fall from the moons. And the spores are dangerous. When they touch water, they grow rapidly. So if you were, for example, to ingest a bunch of, say, green spores, the water inside of your mouth, inside of your body, would cause the spores to erupt and grow these giant vines, and they would kill you, basically. And then every different colored spore has a different function. So I think red spores create crystals, and then black spores create these kinds of like semi-autonomous creatures, all kinds of weird things like that. But fun world building things. All right, so Tress falls in with a bunch of pirates who are sailing the spores, and the spores, they are able to function like water because of something called fluidization, which is another thing that Brandon Sanderson talked about. He mentioned how the idea of Tress, of course, was inspired by The Princess Bride, but he had long been wanting to create a world where the oceans are not made of water, but made out of particles, kind of like sand, that act like water when air is blowing through them. So that's the way that this world works. And then, in the end, Tress reaches the evil kidnapping sorceress's lair, and with the help of some friends and so on and so forth, here's a spoilery part, which is probably not that spoilery, but she does rescue Charlie. How she does it is the fun part of reading the book. Okay, so let's talk about what was brilliant about this book. The first part was Hoyd the Cabin Boy's narrative voice. Now, those who are not familiar with Sanderson, may not know, but Sanderson has this character called Hoyd, and Hoyd is a bit of a world hopper. I'm not super familiar with Sanderson. I'm still kind of new to him myself. So if anybody is listening to this who is an old time Sanderson fan, you can correct me if I say anything wrong. But basically, as I understand it, Hoyd is a character who appears in multiple books in multiple worlds. He is able to travel through the different worlds. He has some special powers. And he often shows up in the background of various stories that are set within the Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson's universe. But in this story, he actually takes a much more prominent role. He's the narrator, and he's basically telling the story to somebody else. And this is very much like The Princess Bride, because the Princess Bride book was written by a guy called William Goldman, who pretended that he was not the author of the book, but was instead its translator and abridger. So he claimed that The Princess Bride is not his own creation, but was a novel that his father read to him, and that he had to translate it from Florinese, which is a made up language. And so when he's telling the story of The Princess Bride, he often interjects himself. Like he will put in notes by him, William Goldman, and by S. Morgenstern, who is the fake author that he claims to have written The Princess Bride originally. So he'll be like talking about maybe like Wesley gave Buttercup a kiss, and then he'll go off on a tangent about how couples used to hook thumbs instead of kissing or something like that. So this is Sanderson's way of mimicking that style by using Hoyd, who is actually an existing character in his world, and then having Hoyd tell the story to somebody else, to some unnamed listener or reader, I suppose. And so Hoyd has a lot of fun asides and commentaries in there as well. So he'll say something like, "You might be asking me why X, Y, and Z happened, but I would tell you to please be quiet. I'm telling the story." Something like that. And I can't really quote off the top of my head, but there's a lot of fun little side notes. If you appreciate that sense of humor, then you're really going to like this book. I personally do. I loved The Princess Bride because of all of its little asides and footnotes. And so I really enjoyed Hoyd the Cabin Boy's narrative voice. The second one is Princess Bride tribute. So we already talked about how Hoyd is partly a Princess Bride tribute. There's also, and the narrator interruptions, there's also pirates because Wesley in the original Princess Bride, he becomes a pirate. He gets captured, I think, by pirates, but then he eventually works his way into becoming the leader of the pirates. Dread Pirate Roberts is his name, I think. And then they also had rats of unusual sizes in the original Princess Bride, and I think the rats were nefarious. They were sinister enemies, kind of things. But in this book, in Tress, the rat, there's only one rat. He's a talking rat, and he's not sinister. He's actually a friend. And there's more to the rat, but I'll save the spoilers. Like I said, spoilers are coming up, so, don't listen to the rest of this video if you don't want spoilers. And then the third thing that I really loved about this book, which is not directly related to writing, is the multimedia aspect of it. So most novels nowadays don't include pictures or illustrations, but Sanderson really loves art. He likes doing leather-bound books. He likes having designs. He likes doing fancy things for his chapter headings and for images inserted within the book. So here are a few examples. Let's do this. As you can see, whoops, skipped a little too far. This is the inside cover, Tress of the Emerald Sea, beautiful design. This is an image of Tress and Charlie that he hired an artist to create. Here is one of the book cover, well, what is this exactly? End covers, I suppose, and it contains a cup. So cups are kind of a theme in Tress. Not really a theme, it's just one of her hobbies is collecting cups. So when Charlie goes off initially and before he gets kidnapped, he actually mails her different cups from the various lands that he visits. Anyways, and then as you can see over here, you've got the different kinds of spores. You've got green spores turning into vines, red spores turning into sharp, jagged crystals, and then the black spores turning into these blobby creature type things. And so the chapter headings, you can see the spores kind of growing as the chapter numbers get higher and higher. So I thought that was pretty clever, the way that they designed this book. All right, let's talk about a few things that I thought were a bit of bungled opportunities or I didn't quite agree with, let's say. So C3 conflict. What is C3? Refer to our previous video about the core concept and craft. Every book in my way of looking at analyzing books consists of 3 concentric circles. And so C3, actually, it should have been C1. Whoops, typed that wrong. C1 is the core. So worldview things. There are several, because Hoyd is the narrator, there are several asides and comments that he makes that are very much worldview things, and he brings them to the surface. It's not very subtle. He just like states flat out, or the characters will say something. And There was one quote, for example, where one character is talking to Tress and says something along the lines of cannonballs come from civilization, kind of implying that killing people the civilized way is more destructive than otherwise. And I disagree with that sentiment. I could probably go into a really long spiel about that, but basically, this is where our worldviews kind of conflict. I don't agree that civilization makes people more vicious and that people left to their own devices, left in a state of nature, Rousseauian kind of um, nobody's bothering you, there's no society, there are no rules, you can just do whatever you want, that people are actually better off in that state. I disagree with that. Actually, if you watch a 2-year-old, a toddler, or just take any human and you take all the rules away from them, all the social expectations, all of um, the sense of right and wrong, and they usually end up destroying themselves and other people. So that was one thing that I kind of disagreed with. Then the second thing that I kind of was like, I could do without this is the story of the Tosher. So Sanderson is known for writing really long epic novels, and part of the thing that makes his stories a little lengthy is he likes to sometimes slip in these side stories. And in Tress, he does this as well. So Hoyd goes off on this really long tangent telling the story of a Tosher who um, eats 2 potatoes, and that sets off a chain of events. And basically, the overall summary of that short story is you never know what small things can do. It's like the basically. But for me personally, it was kind of funny, but it was also like, all right, I don't really want to read this little short insert story. I want to get back to the main story. I want to find out what happens. So for me, I wasn't as much a fan of that. But, it's not horrible. I'm not totally against it. Then, number 3, 1.5 good men. What do I mean by that? Well, in Tress, all of the most interesting characters are women. So Tress, of course, is our main character. The captain of her pirate ship is a woman. The inspector, who's kind of she's not super important, but she's, one of the antagonists, kind of, is a woman. The assistant cannon master is also a woman. And that's fine. I love having lots of strong women characters, but then it feels like he kind of shortchanged the men a little bit because the only really good character who's a man in this book is Tress's dad. So he's a good father and he helps her a lot, at least in the beginning before she gets off on her journey. But then the only other man, there's a guy named Fort who's kind of like the ship's cook in a sense, and he's deaf and he writes on a board. He's okay too. He's kind of nice. Then everybody else is a little bit like weak, perhaps. Even Hoyd himself is he's under a curse this whole time. So he's narrating the story in the past tense because he's broken the curse, but during the events of the story, he is under a curse. So his mind isn't working properly and he's very silly and it's fun. He's a great comic relief, but he's not super how do you say? He's not super active. And then same thing with Huck, the rat. We talked about a talking rat. And just all of the other men in the story have very small bit parts and aren't super interesting. So personally for me, I like having a nice balance of men and women characters who are all very dynamic and active and interesting. It's not super big, but that is one thing that I noticed that I thought could maybe be a little better. But oh well. All right. Then we move to our final part, which is the borrowable ideas. So things that you can do as a writer, writing exercises that you and I can work on. So plot a twist for your work in progress. Now this is where the big spoiler part comes, okay? Sanderson is really good at doing endings with interesting climactic conclusions and throwing red herrings along the story so that once you get to the end, there's a really satisfying reveal. And so the biggest reveal in the story is that Tress has been traveling on a pirate ship with a talking rat all this time. She gets to the sorceress's lair, and the sorceress basically gives her this person who looks like Charlie. And she's like, here's Charlie, take him. And Tress is like, really? It's that easy? And the sorceress is like, yeah. And Tress is suspicious. And she starts to go like, something doesn't feel right. And the way that the narrator narrated it, the way that Hoyt described it, is that it seemed like he was about to say, oh, well, she had changed and Charlie was the same. And she realized that she didn't love Charlie anymore, something, something. And I was like, no, please don't let that be the ending. But it wasn't. The actual twist was that the Charlie she was given was not Charlie. He was one of those black spore being things. And the real Charlie had been cursed, just like Hoyd, and he was with her the whole time in the form of a rat. And there are so many. Now, once you know the reveal, and you go back and reread the book, so this is the reason why I read the book twice, and you go back and reread the book, you can see all these places where Sanderson put in these red herrings to kind of deceive not just Tress but the reader. And so you think that, oh, okay, Huck's just a talking rat, and in a world where there are oceans of dangerous spores, why shouldn't there be a talking rat, right? And then you find out, oh, well, actually, maybe Huck is a familiar. He's like a witch's familiar. He's actually the sorceress's pet. And then finally you find out, no, he's none of those things. He's actually Charlie, who has been turned into a rat, and that's why he can talk. But there are so many little sleight of hand things that Sanderson does to distract people from what the answer really is. And I think that's one thing that you can definitely learn from Sanderson is you can go through the book and look at the places where Tress is talking to Charlie or Huck, sorry, talking to Huck about his background, how he came to be in the pirate ship, what his life is like, etc. And he always answers kind of truthfully, but also a little deceptively, because as part of the curse, he's not allowed to reveal his true identity to her. And it's just really clever. So plot a twist for your work in progress and design some red herrings. And you can look at how Brandon Sanderson did it in the book and then mimic that in your own writing. The second idea is to dig into the backstory of a seemingly unimportant side character. So this is kind of a riff off of the Huck character as well. I sometimes wonder if Sanderson had plotted from the beginning that Huck was going to be Charlie, or if he thought that a talking mouse would be fun, or a talking rat would be fun because the Princess Bride had a rat, and then he was like, wait, I can make the rat Charlie. That would be great. Because in the book Wicked by Gregory Maguire, he actually does this. He talks about how Elphaba sits on the train across from an old goat. And then he mentioned in an interview that when he said an old goat, he meant it metaphorically. But then all of a sudden he had the inspiration that no, maybe it's an actual goat, like a literal talking goat, not just an old man who looks like a goat. In English slang, we sometimes refer to old men as an old goat. But he said, what if it's an actual goat? And then that created this whole entire subplot where Elphaba is trying to defend the talking animals who are losing their powers of speech and so on and so forth, if you're familiar with the story of Wicked. But anyways, so it's interesting when you sometimes dig into the backstory of a seemingly unimportant side character, you might find a lot more interesting plot points that you can do, or sideways twists and things that your story can take. So, and then the third idea is to write a story that breaks the fourth walls, just like Goldman, just like Sanderson does in the story with Hoyd. Experiment with writing a story that breaks convention. So usually in stories, we try to anesthetize people's brains and make them feel like they're inside the world, but experiment with doing exactly the opposite and you can create a Hoyd character, or you can make yourself a character just like Goldman did and tell the story as if you are writing to somebody else. Maybe even write it in a letter, maybe to your kids, your imaginary kids, your friends, your mother, whoever. And that's it for Tress of the Emerald Sea. This has been a really fun read. It's kind of a long book, especially if you're reading it in a very detailed way, but it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. So Year of Sanderson, off to a great start. As always, if you don't yet have it, you can visit beabrilliantwriter.com to grab the Brilliant Writer checklist. And that's it for today. Keep on being a brilliant writer, write and create. And I'll see you guys in the next video.